And so now they're up against some real difficulties around this. And in fact, one of the things that they've not only had the opposition of rival imperialist powers, but in fact, millions of people in the Middle East have turned to Islamic fundamentalism as a vehicle for defending themselves against the U.S. This is a tragedy. This is a great global tragedy. It means that the war that we're dealing with now, in many ways, is more like World War I than the Vietnam War. We're not dealing with people who want to transform the world for the better, defending their countries against foreign imperialism. We're dealing against two different forms of outmoded political economy and outmoded ideologies, that either would want to take us back to the 18th century or take us back to the 11th century, depending on which one you might favor. But it creates a situation that is very horrible. I think one of the best analyses of this is an essay called Bringing Forward Another Way that was authored by Bob Avakian. But the point of it was to point out to us that this is not a situation like Vietnam, where we can choose to stand with the People's Liberation Front of South Vietnam against the U.S. imperialists. We actually have to bring forward a different kind of movement in the world if we're actually going to liberate the people not only in those countries, but in our own countries, and not have all of us slide into a new era of darkness. Now, if this is this horrible dynamic of McWorld versus jihad, as some people have referred to it, if it's not turned around, we're going to find ourselves in a great deal of danger. Because as was alluded to by Michael, these people have already set in motion the idea of attacking Iran. For a lot of these people, Iran is the route out of Iraq. And it's amazing when you watch the debates going on between the presidential candidates. The Republican candidate, McCain, he wants to stay in Iraq and fight for 1,000,000 years. And the two Democratic candidates say, no, we ought to start phasing out of Iraq. Where we got to really fight is Afghanistan and Pakistan. In other words, there's enormous unity within the ruling class that the United States must control the Middle East, right? They'll have tactical differences over where they want to put their main emphasis on at any given time, but this is the way that they're going to go. And these invasions that have taken place basically have created a situation of no turning back for them. In other words, they all recognize, this is why none of the Democratic candidates will promise to be out of Iraq by any particular time. They all realize that a precipitous withdrawal from this huge power play that they've made would represent an enormous strategic setback globally for U.S. imperialism, and none of them are going to do that on their watch. Do not hold your breath waiting for any of the presidential candidates to remove U.S. forces from the Middle East. What, in fact, we're going to see most likely is an escalation. So with that as background, how did this then reflect itself domestically? Well, the Bush regime reflected a very interesting alliance, new alliance that came to the fore between the grouping that was referred to as the neocons and the Christian fundamentalists. And the neocons, the thing I found that was interesting and common about both of these people is they both look to pre-Enlightenment sources for their ideology. They literally do. So on the one hand, and the other thing that they hold in common is the neocons and the Christian fundamentalists all believe that the United States is God's chosen nation. That the United States has a special mission to transform the whole world. They all literally believe in this. They have, different variations on the theme, but that's the ideology that guides them. And at the same time, the Christian fundamentalists, or I would often call them Christian fascist forces, brought an organized and coherent social voting base behind this, because the neocons didn't have their own independent voting base. So they brought in this social base, and boom, manufacturing's gone in the United States. The New Deal social compact out the window. All of this stuff is gone, and what it means is it's going to impose a lot of suffering on the American people here at home. And in order to do that, they actually have to be in a position where they can maintain control. In other words, we are basically in an imperialist wartime ethos that's being set down. Mobilize against the Islamic menace, extend general anti-immigrant measures, heighten white supremacy, open promotion of religion and attacks on science, and a climate of trade your rights for your safety. Now, the Bush regime just went ahead and did this. And many people have said, well, dang, the Democrats didn't have any backbone. Well, actually, the Democrats, I think, had an amazing amount of backbone. They've been willing to go up against everything that their voting constituency wants, and done this in a rather fearless way. But the reason why they do that, and the reason why they are basically go along with the whole premise, is there's a general agreement on the goals. U.S. imperialism must expand its global control and must control the fossil fuel reserves of the world. And the second thing is that nobody in any political party of the ruling class has come forward with a coherent alternative program to what Bush is doing. Really, you think about it, I mean, if somebody else has a coherent program of, well, no, here's how to save U.S. imperialism, here's what we should be doing, we'd probably be hearing about it in these election debates, but we don't. So there's just these little tiny, squabbling at the margins over how it actually should be done. And now, as a result, they have a common necessity to see this through, no matter what the popular opposition may be. And that's why you don't see any of these Democratic candidates campaigning on the U.S. out of the Middle East. You don't see them denouncing the illegal seizures of executive power because they hope to be exercising them soon. You don't see any calls for the end of torture now or the repudiation of nuclear threats against Iran. Obama says, no, we can keep everything on the table. There's no call to disband the global detention camps or in the illegal wiretaps. I mean, my God, what happened on the illegal wiretaps? When they were discovered, the Democrats had a hissy fit and said, look, if you just come to us in the first place and ask for authorization, we'd have given it to you. Why did you have to go do it illegally? So this is the kind of strata, the situation that we get into. And so the Democrats basically did become politically paralyzed because they didn't have an alternative program. And unfortunately, a lot of the middle strata in this country who looked to the Democrats as their saviors became equally paralyzed in this situation. So we see a country today in which the rule of law is under massive assault, as is the secular government and the separation of church and state. And this in turn has created two phenomena. One is it's been a source of enormous exposure of what this system is up to and what it's about. But at the same time, it's created enormous illusions about what we could do. And unfortunately, rather than looking at the material conditions that underlie all this and why it's happening, there's been too much of, oh, the pendulum theory, it swung too far to the right and now things are going to swing back to the left, or democracy is self-correcting, or the worst one is, oh, just 8 more months. Well, just 8 more months until what? Because, Frank, I was up at a forum at Columbia University, and I asked Jonathan Hafetz, who was on this panel, about it, and I said, well, what do you think these guys are really going to do about these civil liberties things if they were to come to power? He says, well, basically, they're going to just sort of trim them off at the edges and make them a little nicer, and they're going to be permanently codified into law. In other words, if this stuff is not turned around before the Bush administration ends, it will become the new law of the land. In other words, yesterday's unthinkable nightmare becomes today's unfortunate necessity and becomes tomorrow's new normality. So there's not going to be any going back to some idealized bourgeois democracy at this point, which it should always be pointed out is the other side of the dictatorship of the capitalist class. Democracy is a way of organizing a class dictatorship and operating it. That's what it always is, and that's what it always will be. But now we're in a situation, frankly, and this is both the scary and the exciting thing is, Michael was talking about how things could get very extreme in the next little while. Frankly, if things don't get a hell of a lot more extreme, we're not ever going to be able to change things in a progressive way. In other words, the horrors are only going to continue and get worse, but we have to figure out how we can wrench every amount of freedom and opportunity out of that in order to change things around. Right now, there's a bad polarization in society. The polarization in establishment politics is between mainstream imperialists on one side and the neocons and Christian fascists on the other. This is not a polarization that's very good for the people of the world. What we need is a different type of polarization. We need to be fighting to repolarize society where all the defenders of imperialism are on the defensive, and those who want a whole new world are the ones that have the initiative. And critical to that is fighting against every attack on the rights of the people and bringing into life millions of people who will no longer accept the crimes of this system in return for the promise of relative comfort and safety based on the spoils and the parasitism of imperialism. We have to fight to free all political prisoners, and we have to open up the space for not only for resistance, but to remain tense for revolutionary openings, because another world is possible, and we have to be in challenging and inspiring people to go there.